The web was originally designed as a stateless system. What that means when we say that the web was stateless is that the way it was originally intended was that every request that would take place on the web would be seen sort of as the first request. No memory would be retained about requests that had been made previously. Let's say that a client makes a request to a web server. They make a request for what we'll call page A, then a little while later they make a request for page B. When the request for page B goes through, the web server will not at all connect that with the request that previously went through for page A. That's essentially what we're talking about when we say that the web is stateless. Even though this statelessness was built into the web from the beginning, it's ended up being something that we needed to find a way to overcome in a lot of situations as the web has progressed in the years since. Whenever we want to do things like have online shopping carts or be able to log into a website or a lot of these different sorts of things, they require that the web be able to have some memory of things that have come before. When we log into a website, we then need for all the pages we visit on that website after that to remember that we've already completed the login process. Whenever we add an item to our shopping cart, we need for the web to remember that that item is in our cart until who knows how many pages later when we're actually ready to check out. So being able to deal with and overcome the statelessness of the web is something that you pretty much have to learn to deal with in every different web-based language that you come to. Certainly one of the most common ways of overcoming the statelessness of the web is through the use of cookies. Cookies are hopefully something that you've run into before, had some dealings with before, but just in case you haven't, sort of the bird's eye lowdown on them are that cookies are traditionally thought of as being small text files. You visit a page on a web server. The web server, in addition to that page, sends back a request asking the client to make a cookie. That client then creates that little text file, which nowadays isn't really a text file. It's more of a record in a little internal database. But one way or another, the client creates that little cookie in response to the server's request. From that point forward then, anytime a new request is made to that same web server, the client will send that cookie, the cookie that it was asked to make, back to that server. So the server says, hey, browser, hold this for me. And then from that point forward, whenever the browser comes back to that server, they'll remind the server, hey, you asked me to hold this for you. That's essentially the way that cookies work. In our browsers nowadays, generally we have pretty easy access to be able to see what cookies we actually have stored, what cookies are around. Here I am actually in my browser on the PHP website. If I pull up the development tools in this particular browser, under the resources section, there's a section here called cookies. And when I take a look at the cookies section, I can see all of the cookies that this website has asked to have created here in my web browser. It looks like every time I visit the PHP website, it asks for my browser to create a cookie called last news, one called last lang, one called country, and it gives me additional information about each one of those cookies there. Certainly the most important thing about each of the cookies is the cookie's actual name and the cookie's value. Although each cookie also has a domain that it belongs to, a path that it's accessible from, an expires date and time, how big the cookie actually is. Cookies can also potentially be secure. All of the different details of cookies all laid out there for me. Nice, clean, and easy to be able to see. If you're working in a different web browser than I am, chances are you'll have to do something slightly different to be able to find your cookies, but I bet if you look at the help menu or do a little bit of Googling, you'll be able to figure your browser out just fine. As you can probably guess, PHP gives us access to cookies. With PHP, since we're writing scripts that execute on the server, we can execute statements that will result in a request being sent to a client, asking that client to store a cookie. PHP then also gives us the ability to be able to actually use cookies that have been stored. Let's take a look at how those two different things are done. I have a new page that I've put together here just called Cookie Example. And what I would like to do here in the cookie example is just go through the basic mechanics of how to create and how to read cookies in PHP. For starters, being able to read cookies in PHP is a very easy thing to be able to do. Just like PHP automatically parses and stores GET and POST requests for us, PHP also automatically parses and stores any cookies that it happens to receive from a client. The way it does this is by creating a special array called $_cookie, This is an associative array, very much like the get and post arrays are. So we could use as a key for that array the name of any particular cookie that we may have asked to have stored. So if I, for example, say color there as the key, that would be me asking PHP to give me the value that goes along with the color cookie. If I were to echo that value, I'll say echo the color cookies value is, and then I'll append that onto it with a break. We can see what we actually have for the color cookie. If I jump back to my browser, refresh, it comes up and it says the color cookies value is blank. All right, well, let's look and see what cookies we have for this page. If I pull up my developer tools, I can look and see that for localhost here, cookies are blank. There are no cookies. There is no cookie called color, which is why when I ask for the color cookies value, it comes back and it gives me nothing. So in PHP, how is it that we would actually create a cookie if that was what we wanted to do? Well, PHP has a function built in called setCookie that we can use anytime we want PHP to give the instruction to the browser, to the client, letting it know that we want to have a cookie created. If you go back to the PHP website again and search for setCookie, you'll find the documentation that goes along with it. You can see that essentially the way that the setCookie function works is we provide a name for the cookie that we want to have created. We provide a value to go along with that cookie. If we choose, we can also then say when the cookie expires, what path it's accessible from, what domain, so on and so forth, all the different aspects of a cookie. If I were to use my setCookie function here to tell it I want to create a new cookie called color, and maybe I'll tell it to set the value of that color cookie to green, if I go back over to my browser again and hit refresh, it comes back and tells me it cannot modify header information. The trick with that is that when I do this setCookie function, what I'm essentially doing is I'm asking PHP to insert into the response headers the instructions that the browser will then receive telling it to create the cookie. So when that's done, that needs to be done prior to any other output being sent. Since the headers are always sent before any other output, that's why they're called headers, they're at the beginning, we need to make sure that anything we want to do to change the headers, like when we use the header function to do redirection, we need to make sure that that happens before any other output. So instead of me doing setCookie there, how about I come up to the very top of my document, I'll put in a new pair of PHP tags, and I will put my setCookie instruction there. That way this setCookie function call is occurring before the first piece of output, my doctype line here, is actually run into, is actually executed and sent. Back to the browser now, I'll hit refresh, the error message goes away, and it tells me now I can see in my browser that a cookie has been created, its name is color, and its value is green. If I actually hit refresh at that point one more time so that the cookie actually exists at the time the page is being built, is being executed, I can see that now my cookie array is giving me back the value of green when I ask for the value of the color cookie. So kind of thinking it through what happened in order, the first time I accessed this page and there was no error, we said set the cookie. That sent the instruction to the browser telling it to make a cookie. The browser then made the cookie and I saw it show up in my developer tools, but the color green didn't actually show up in my echo statement at that point. That's because when the request for that page had been made, the cookie didn't exist, so there was no cookie that had been parsed and stored here in the cookie array. But then when I hit refresh again, it again said send a message to the browser telling it to create a cookie called color with a value of green, but this time that request had already had that cookie created, so it was sent in and was parsed and stored in the array for me to be able to access. So when it comes to actually creating and accessing cookies, this is really about all there is to it. The setCookie function to tell it to make a cookie, the actual cookie array to be able to access the value of your cookies. With those two tools, PHP makes it relatively easy to be able to do whatever it is that we need to do with cookies. Some of the only things that you might want to keep in mind with cookies is that most browsers limit the number of cookies that can be created, so usually trying to keep the number of cookies you make for a particular website modest is a good idea. Also remember that the value of cookies pretty much is limited to having to be strings. So here I can store the color green as a string, but if I tried to have a color object stored in a cookie, that's not something I could do. If I tried to store an array of any type, I wouldn't be able to do that either. Whatever's stored in a cookie has to be something that can essentially be stored in a text file, so we're more or less stuck with our cookie values having to be strings. So if you ever do need to store any kind of more complex PHP data, keep in mind that you're going to need to find a way to convert that data into a string, store it in the cookie, and then you'll need a way to convert it back to its native PHP self when it's read back in from the cookie. Besides those couple things, there really aren't that many tricks to them. Cookies can be a very handy tool.